those days. See what he did in my hair. No. Yeah, thank God he quit that. But he was a terrible barber. But
did you ever get your haircut?
Yeah. No way. And so we talked. And he said, and I said, oh yeah, well, we'll play together. We did some stuff. I don't think I had my fiddle with me or something. And then we were playing in St. Martinville, believe it or not, at Boucherie, the first one. And he and Sadie show up. And of course, as Dennis McGee, I said, oh God, this is great. And he says, yeah, I'm the best Cajun fiddler there is. I said, well, let's go. And so we just got together, and I just couldn't believe he was still alive and somebody played like this. Because you got to understand, when I grew up in Scott, Louisiana, and there was a certain style of playing fiddle, Cajun fiddle. It was mostly because Doc Orrin Guidry was the best. We played with Aldous Roger, and he played with different people. But he was from Scott. He graduated with my dad, so that's what was the style. It was more of kind of a swing style of what you hear of sort of modern Cajun fiddles. Dennis's style was completely different. It was more rooted in French music. I mean, from France or Acadie or some other place. It was not kind of swing music or country and western, to say the least. And so we became fast friends, and then it was because of Nick Spitzer. I mean, this is how crazy we were in those days. Nick says, you ought to get a grant like to document his music. I said, man, they give grants to Cajuns? He said, yeah. So I applied for the NEA grant, and I got that, and Dennis and I, it was study. I mean, the thing about Dennis is like, how do you play that song? And he's like this. And I said, well, what do you do here? Like this. And so in other words, he played the same way every time, and it was like, okay, you just play along with him. So I think I recorded 158 of his songs. And then quit playing. I quit bringing my tape recorder. Mm-hmm. And of course, the day I go there without tape recorder, he says, here's another one coming in. He's got a new song. And so we went out on a tour in 1977 on the East Coast called the Festival de Demone, which were French-speaking people up there. And I think we really got, and Sadie was there too, and we got to be really good friends. And so basically, it was just going to visit Dennis, and because he had a certain edge on the history about the music that few people had. He recorded in the 20s to the 30s, kind of let it follow, until probably the 60s, and he was just an amazing guy. He had stories and everything like that. So he was a guy, and he played with Sadie Corville, like I said, his brother-in-law, who played second. And funny thing, when they first recorded, Sadie didn't want his name on the record. And you think, why not? Because Sadie wanted to be a legitimate businessman. So he didn't want to be associated. So his, and that's a funny thing about Sadie that kind of always wondered about. So there was another second fiddle player who played with Dennis by the name of Ernest Frugier. And he really played like Dennis. I mean, he played, you can tell when Sadie plays, Sadie plays pretty straight. Ernest will play like rolling songs and things like that. So there's a different kind of style to do that, but that's the earliest style that I know of second fiddle playing.
Mitch, how did you meet Mr. McGee?
I never did.
Never did?
No. When I had a friend that knew him, and we wanted to get together with him, but he had a gig at the Liberty Theater, and he fell. He was trying to get off the stage, and they had these steps, and he fell, and he broke his hip, and he ended up in the nursing home in Eunice. Yeah. And I think he died like 6 months later, so I never got to meet him. But I had a lot of friends that would make me copies of field recordings that they had done of Dennis. And so I just had a big stack of tapes, and I would just sit there with my fiddle. And Dennis was my hero. I mean, when I heard, actually, Michael, I'd heard Michael the first time, and I was just like, wow, this is like another side of Cajun music. Because like what Michael was saying, growing up in Lafayette, Louisiana, a lot of, when I was young, growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, mostly what you heard was like Cajun country music. I never was a big fan of country music. And what I liked was the oldest form of Cajun music. And for the first time when I ever heard Dennis McGee, to me that was like, that's the oldest stuff, which to me almost sounded kind of like Irish music or something, And that's just what I wanted to learn. I didn't want to learn any kind of country or even Texas swing influenced Cajun music. And listening to Michael, when I was a kid, I used to go to Mulots and watch them play with my mom and dad. And Michael was bringing out those old tunes. and really there were no other fiddle players playing those tunes that were Cajun other than Michael, and so that was it. Once I heard that was my goal, to play just those tunes.
Now, when you talk about those historic trips to New Orleans that these musicians would take, one of the most historic was the trip and recordings with Amadé Ardouin, the Black Creole accordionist, who recorded across racial lines with Dennis McGee. I never really looked into this actually. How did that happen? I mean, were there no restrictions? Did they have to do anything about the trip itself? Did they travel in the same vehicle? Were they able to?
That's a good question. I had that same.
Stay in the same hotel together?
Yeah, I doubt it.
Yeah.
I doubt that. I had the same idea. I mean, they were both from Chautauqua, and they met. I mean, Dennis was probably not a very good worker, and neither was Amadé, so they were good musicians. And it's amazing if you listen to those. You listen to those early recordings of those two. It's so incredibly tight and intricate. Amadé's music that's another story to get into Amadé, but about 80% of Amadé's songs, recording output, are still played today in one form or the other. And those two played amazing. They played for both, and Dennis used to say, well, it was safe because they both played for white dances and they played for black dances, or Creole dances, however you want to say that. And so it was an interesting combination. Yeah, I always wondered about that. Well, Dennis was very dark too, I mean, it's like, you get out in the sun, I mean, who knows? That's a good question. I know that they both, Sadie and Dennis told me the story. I did a school with them. This was funny because the first time they went there, they had their fiddles in a little sack, and so they got there on the train, of course, and so I think they were recording in the St. Charles Hotel, and they had an elevator. Well, they've never seen an elevator before, so they said, no, you get in this elevator and you go to the third floor, whatever floor they were recording on. So they got in there, and the guy. They had somebody operating the elevator in those times, and he pressed the button, and the thing moved, and they both hit the floor. They thought they were having an earthquake. They'd never seen that. This is the beginning of an interesting time.
There is a tradition of the Creole fiddle as well that is alive in Beausoleil's music, and is actually stayed alive really with just a few performers, it seems, through the years. Bébé and Ken Ray Fondo. It just seems like there's just a few that have kept that going now. I think Jeffrey Broussard is playing some, and Cedric Watson and others. Could you talk a bit about what the tradition of the Creole fiddle, what is unique about that tradition? And Mitch, you're one of the great practitioners of it.
Well, gosh, I mean, in a lot of ways, I mean, if you study Dennis McGee's music, it's very close, I don't know. I mean, it's just, there's a certain feel, and I guess, you have to look at the people. I mean, Creoles came from Africa, so there's these, I guess they played in a lot of modal tunes, the tunes were in modal keys, and to me it sounded very African. It sounded a lot like when you listen to music from Mali, Africa, and Dennis played, like the Cajuns, it seemed like the old-time Cajuns played a lot of reels, but the Creoles, I don't know, it was such a mixture of stuff. It's really hard to explain. I mean, because Ken Ray even had tunes that sounded like they came from the islands, the Caribbean islands. So I think so much of our history we just don't know, because nobody wrote anything down, nobody knew.
You mentioned earlier about Ken Ray Fondo. Could you tell people a little bit more about him as a historical figure in our music?
Yeah, sure. Ken Ray was, I remember growing up, it's like Michael, did a lot of stuff with Ken Ray. I remember as a kid growing up, probably in the early 80s, and seeing pictures of this guy. And he was this black fiddle player, and he had this great smile. And I remember my mom and dad saying, that's Ken Ray Fondo. So in my eyes, he was like this god, And I remember the first time I ever met him was at Festival Carien. And I was walking through the park, and I saw him coming towards me. And I was with a friend who knew him, and he had a double fiddle case with him. And I was just freaking out. I was like, oh my God. It was like, seeing John Lennon or Paul McCartney walking towards me, And I'm like, I'm going to get to meet Ken Ray. And my friend talked to him in French, and Ken Ray put his double fiddle case down. He opened it up, and I thought, wow, he's going to play. And then he had one fiddle, and where the other fiddle was supposed to be was a fifth of whiskey. And it was about...
Which one did you take out?
It was about an inch of whiskey left in the bottom of it, and he killed it and threw it in a barrel, and then he told me hello. I shook his hand. I was freaking out, and then he packed his case up and kept on walking, you know. And I was just like, man, that is the coolest guy.
Did you ever study with him at all, or?
I did. I was able to go to his house a few times. Not not a whole lot. Like I really would have loved to have spent more time with him, but I went to his house a few times. It was funny. Most of the people that connected me with him were Europeans. There was this girl. She was from Denmark. And they were really close friends. And so when she would come to Lafayette, I would ride with her to visit Canray. And it was just an incredible experience. And it was really cool, too. He was such an open-minded musician. I mean, he didn't consider himself as just a Cajun or Creole musician. He would play, like, with this girl, they played Danish tunes for like an hour. He had learned all these Danish tunes. So they would sit there and play Danish tunes, and then she'd get him to play a Cajun or Creole tune. So that's how he was, you know.
Any recordings of Canray Fondo plays Danish?
Still underground.
Could you maybe give us a sample of one of his songs, either however you want to do it, or one of the songs that are associated?
Yeah,
with
we
him?
recorded one on the latest album, so we could maybe do that one. Maybe Bars de la Prison.